Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Lara, and you're listening to Crazy Stories of Women. Grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's unbelievable story. It is a story of blind devotion, cold betrayal, and a meticulous, brutal reckoning that changed everything. Well, let's begin. Part 1. Growing up in a comfortable, tight-knit American suburb, I was a girl who believed in epic cinematic love stories. I believed in the kind of love that conquers all obstacles, the kind of love you fight for until your hands bleed. And for me, that love had a name from the very first day of high school. Ethan. Ethan was the boy every single girl in our town dreamed about. He wasn't just remarkably handsome, with a sharp jawline, striking dark eyes, and an effortless athletic grace. He possessed a quiet, magnetic charm that seemed to draw all the oxygen out of any room he walked into. He was the star quarterback, the honor student, the boy from a modest background who worked a part-time job at the local garage, but carried himself like he owned the entire world. Girls would giggle and whisper when he passed their lockers, competing fiercely just to get a fleeting glance or a polite smile from him. He was the ultimate prize, completely out of reach for most. And then there was me. I wasn't unpopular, but I certainly wasn't the glamorous head cheerleader either. I was bookish, intensely loyal, and deeply sensitive. But more than anything else, I was stubborn. The moment I laid eyes on Ethan during our freshman year biology class, my heart made a definitive, unchanging choice. I didn't care that there was a literal line of more popular, more beautiful girls trying to capture his attention. I didn't care that my friends laughed and told me I was setting myself up for a devastating heartbreak. I made it my personal mission to show Ethan that while other girls might care about his status or his looks, I was the only one who truly saw him for who he was. I wanted to be his rock, his biggest cheerleader, his safe harbor from the chaotic world. For over 3 years, I pursued him with a gentle but fierce persistence. I would stay late after his football games to hand him a cold bottle of water and congratulate him, even when the popular crowd swarmed around him. I would spend hours helping him study for his advanced placement exams, sitting across from him in the quiet, dusty corners of the public library, completely mesmerized by the way a strand of hair fell across his forehead when he focused. I baked him his favorite chocolate chip cookies before every major test, listened intently to his dreams of escaping our small town to become a corporate executive, and stood by his side during his lowest moments when his family struggled financially. I poured my heart, my time, and my soul into showing him that my love was unconditional, unwavering, and eternal. My friends frequently warned me that I was doing too much. They told me that a man enjoys the thrill of the chase, and that by making myself so completely available, I was diminishing my own worth. They warned me that Ethan was too calculating, that he always seemed to keep his true feelings locked behind a polite, impenetrable wall, but I brushed their words aside with a dismissive wave of my hand. I convinced myself that he was simply guarded because of his family's financial hardships, and that my warmth would eventually melt his icy exterior. I believed with absolute certainty that if I just loved him hard enough, if I proved my loyalty deeply enough, he would eventually realize that we were destined to be together. And then, during the spring of our senior year, the miracle I had been praying for finally happened. We were sitting on the hood of my car, watching the sunset over the valley after a long afternoon of studying. The sky was a breathtaking canvas of deep purples, vibrant oranges, and soft pinks. Out of nowhere, Ethan reached out, took my hand in his, and looked directly into my eyes with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. He told me that he had never met anyone as dedicated, as kind, or as beautiful as me. He confessed that while other girls were fleeting and superficial, I was the only constant light in his life. When he kissed me for the very first time under that fading sky, I felt an overwhelming wave of euphoria. I felt like the luckiest, most blessed girl in the entire world. I had won the heart of the boy I adored. But the whispers started almost immediately after we became an official couple. You see, there was one major factor that I always chose to overlook, but the rest of our town simply couldn't ignore. My father was a highly successful self-made businessman. He owned a prominent, lucrative construction and engineering firm that handled major commercial contracts across the entire state. We lived in a beautiful, expansive estate on the wealthy side of town, and my future was completely secure. Ethan, on the other hand, came from a family that constantly struggled just to pay the monthly rent. As soon as Ethan and I started walking down the school hallways hand in hand, the cruel rumors began to circulate like wildfire. In the cafeteria, at the local diner, and at weekend parties, people whispered behind my back. They said that Ethan didn't love me at all. They claimed that he was incredibly smart, fiercely ambitious, and that he had looked at my family's wealth and made a cold, calculated career move. They whispered that he had chosen me not because of my devotion or my personality, but because my father's company was his golden ticket out of poverty and into the elite upper class. Even my own family was deeply skeptical at first. I remember a specific evening during my freshman year of college when my father called me into his private oak-paneled study. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, looking at me with eyes full of profound worry and paternal protectiveness. He told me that he had met many ambitious young men in his line of work, and that Ethan had a look in his eyes that made him deeply uncomfortable, a look of intense hunger and calculating ambition. My father gently suggested that perhaps Ethan was moving a bit too fast, positioning himself a bit too perfectly to gain my father's professional favor and mentorship. I was absolutely furious. I screamed at my father, accusing him of being cynical, untrusting, and incapable of understanding true, selfless love. I defended Ethan with everything I had. I told my father that Ethan was a good, honorable, and deeply sensitive soul who loved me for exactly who I was. I pointed out how hard Ethan worked in college, how he never explicitly asked for money, and how polite and respectful he always was during family dinners. I believed to my very core that Ethan was entirely innocent of these cynical accusations. I looked at his handsome, calm face every day and saw nothing but kindness, warmth, and a genuine desire to build a beautiful life with me. To me, his ambition wasn't a threat. It was an admirable quality of a man who wanted to provide a wonderful future for us. Eventually, my father relented because he loved me too much to risk driving me away. He chose to trust my judgment, albeit reluctantly. Upon our graduation from college, my father offered Ethan a high-level executive track position within his firm. Ethan accepted the job with a display of humility and profound gratitude that completely charmed my parents and temporarily silenced the doubters. He worked incredibly long hours, demonstrated an undeniable brilliance in corporate strategy, and quickly rose through the ranks of the company, earning my father's genuine respect and trust. 2 years later, Ethan proposed to me in the exact same spot where we had shared our very first kiss. The ring was beautiful, purchased with the money he had earned from his new position. When we stood at the altar in front of hundreds of guests exchanging our vows, I looked out at the crowd and felt a deep sense of vindication. I wanted to scream at everyone who had ever doubted us, everyone who had whispered that he was just using me. He was standing right there, looking at me with tears in his eyes, promising to love and cherish me for the rest of his life. We bought a gorgeous home, settled into a comfortable, sophisticated routine, and to the outside world, we were the absolute definition of a successful, blissfully happy American power couple. For over a decade, our marriage seemed utterly flawless. Ethan was a devoted, attentive husband who never forgot a single birthday, never missed an opportunity to bring me fresh flowers, and always held my hand tightly when we walked through public spaces. He was incredibly busy, often required to travel across the country for days at a time to manage the company's expanding regional offices and secure massive multi-million-dollar contracts. I never doubted him for a single fleeting second. When he called me late at night from a hotel room in Chicago, New York, or Atlanta, telling me how exhausted he was and how much he desperately missed me, my heart swelled with deep sympathy and immense love. I viewed his frequent absences as a necessary sacrifice for the bright, prosperous future we were building together. I was his proud, supportive wife, completely blind to the darkness lurking just beneath the polished surface of my perfect life. And then came the morning of our 15th wedding anniversary. It was a crisp, beautiful autumn day, with golden leaves gently falling across our manicured front lawn. I woke up early, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life we had created. Ethan had left the house exceptionally early that morning, kissing my forehead gently while I was still half awake, explaining that he had an urgent, unavoidable board meeting at the downtown headquarters, but promised to be back by 6 o'clock in the evening for our special anniversary dinner reservation at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. At around 11 o'clock in the morning, the doorbell rang. I walked down the grand hallway, expecting a delivery courier with the usual anniversary bouquet of red roses from Ethan. Instead, when I opened the heavy front door, the porch was completely empty. The only thing left behind was a small, elegant white envelope resting quietly on the welcome mat. My name was written across the front in a sharp, unfamiliar, and highly precise handwriting that definitely did not belong to my husband. My heart began to beat with a strange, faint flutter of nervous anticipation. I picked up the envelope, brought it inside, and carefully slid it open. I expected to find a romantic clue for an anniversary scavenger hunt, a thoughtful surprise that Ethan had meticulously arranged to celebrate our 15 years together. But when I pulled out the single sheet of heavy cardstock paper inside, there was no romantic message, no poetry, and no signature. There was only a single line of text printed in bold, stark black ink, an address to a residential neighborhood in a quiet town about an hour and a half away from our city, followed by a specific time, 2 p.m. today. I stared at the address for several long minutes, my mind racing through various possibilities. I convinced myself that Ethan had secretly purchased a beautiful vacation home for us. Or perhaps he had arranged an incredibly luxurious, private anniversary experience at an exclusive boutique resort. A bright smile spread across my face as I rushed upstairs to change into an elegant, sophisticated outfit. I wanted to look absolutely perfect for whatever incredible surprise my thoughtful husband had prepared for me. I grabbed my car keys, stepped out into the crisp autumn air, and began driving toward the mysterious destination, my heart completely filled with joy, excitement, and anticipation, utterly unaware that I was driving straight into the devastating wreckage of my entire life. Hold on just a second. If you are hooked on this story and want to hear more of my intense life experiences, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment down below too. It helps me immensely, and I would be incredibly grateful for your support. Now, let's get straight back to the story. Part 2. The drive toward that mysterious address was the most blissful 90 minutes of my life. At least, that's how I remember it now, with a bitter irony. I had the windows down, the cool autumn breeze playing with my hair, and I was listening to the playlist we had played at our wedding. I felt like a teenager again, giddy with the thrill of being loved. I kept imagining Ethan standing in the driveway of a charming cottage or a sleek modern getaway, holding a glass of champagne, ready to toast to our 15 years of marriage. I even practiced my surprised face in the rearview mirror, wanting to make sure he felt that all his effort was appreciated. I was so incredibly naive. I was a woman who had spent half her life building a pedestal for a man who was, at that very moment, kicking the foundation out from under me. As I exited the highway and began navigating the winding back roads of a quiet, upscale suburb I had never visited before, the scenery began to change. The houses here weren't flashy or grand like our estate. They were cozy, traditional, and screamed family life. There were tricycles left on manicured lawns and basketball hoops over garage doors. It felt grounded. I turned onto a street called Willow Lane, checking the GPS on my dashboard. The numbers on the houses ticked down slowly. 114, 116, 118. And then, there it was, 120 Willow Lane. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial house with slate blue siding and a bright white porch. It looked like something off a postcard for the American dream. I pulled my car to the curb a few houses down, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes scanned the driveway looking for Ethan's luxury SUV. It wasn't there. Instead, there was a sensible silver minivan and a sturdy domestic pickup truck. My brow furrowed. Maybe he had parked around the back? Or maybe he had rented these vehicles to throw me off the scent. I checked my watch. 1:55 p.m. The note had said 2 p.m. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down my silk dress. I felt slightly overdressed for this quiet neighborhood, but I didn't care. I walked toward the house, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. As I approached the front walk, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Not with excitement this time, but with a sudden icy prickle of confusion. On the front porch, there was a small wooden sign that read, "The Millers established 2014. Miller, that wasn't our name. My last name was Sterling. Ethan's last name was Sterling. I paused for a second, wondering if I had the wrong address, but I pulled the white envelope from my purse and double-checked. 120 Willow Lane. This was definitely it. I told myself that perhaps Ethan had bought this house from a family named Miller and hadn't taken the sign down yet. It was a weak explanation, but I clung to it. I reached the front door and took a deep breath, preparing for the surprise I expected to hear the moment the door swung open. I rang the doorbell. For a few moments, there was silence. Then I heard the muffled sound of footsteps and a high-pitched giggle. The door opened and my entire world stopped spinning. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, stood there. She had curly brown hair and a pair of bright, inquisitive eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. My breath hitched in my throat. Before I could say a word, a woman appeared behind the child. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a casual sweater and jeans, her face glowing with a quiet domestic happiness. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, offering a polite, curious smile. I stood there, frozen, my voice trapped in my chest. I'm sorry, I stammered, my mind racing. I'm looking for... I was sent to this address. Is there a surprise here? For an anniversary? The woman's expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. An anniversary? No, I think you might have the wrong house. My husband and I already celebrated ours back in June. At that exact moment, a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the SUV I was looking for. It was a nondescript mid-size sedan. The engine cut out, the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was carrying a grocery bag in one arm and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. He was wearing a casual fleece jacket and baseball cap, looking like any other suburban father coming home from a quick errand. He looked up and saw me standing on his porch. The grocery bag didn't just slip. It hit the concrete with a sickening thud. Oranges rolled across the driveway, and a glass jar of pasta sauce shattered, staining the white concrete like a fresh wound. The man was Ethan. But he wasn't the Ethan I knew. He wasn't the polished executive in the three-piece suit. He looked older, more relaxed, and utterly terrified. The silence that followed was deafening. The woman on the porch looked from me to Ethan, her smile fading into a mask of concern. "Honey, do you know this woman?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she sensed the sudden violent shift in the atmosphere. Ethan didn't answer her. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen in 15 years of marriage. Absolute, unadulterated guilt. There was no explanation. No, it's not what it looks like. No clever corporate lie. The truth was written in the wreckage of the groceries at his feet. "Lara," he whispered, his voice cracking. The little girl reached out and grabbed his hand as he walked up the porch steps. "Daddy, you forgot the juice," she chirped, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just detonated a bomb in the center of my life. "Daddy." The word echoed in my skull like a gunshot. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the world began to tilt on its axis. I grabbed the railing of the porch to keep from collapsing. I looked at the woman, the other wife. I looked at the child, his daughter. I looked at the man I had worshipped since I was 16 years old, the man I had fought for, the man I had given everything to. "How long?" I managed to choke out. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, a ghost. Ethan looked at the woman, whose face was now pale with dawning horror, and then back at me. "Lara, please. Let's go somewhere and talk. Not here. Please." "How long, Ethan?" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat with a raw, primal agony. The woman, who I later learned was named Sarah, stepped back, pulling the little girl behind her. "Ethan, what is she talking about? Who is Lara?" The scene was a nightmare. Neighbors were starting to peek through their curtains. The sun was still shining, the birds were still chirping, but my life was ending. Ethan tried to reach for my arm, but I recoiled as if his touch were acid. I looked at Sarah, who was now crying, her hands over her mouth. "I'm his wife," I said, my voice cold and sharp as a razor. "We've been married for 15 years. Today is our anniversary." Sarah's knees gave out and she slumped against the doorframe. The little girl began to cry, frightened by the adult's distress. Ethan stood between us, a man with 2 lives, 2 families, and now 0 futures. He had managed the impossible, a double life that spanned over a decade. The business trips, the late nights at the office, the regional conferences. It was all a cover. While he was climbing the ladder at my father's firm using my family's influence and money, he was using his travel time to maintain a second home, a second wife, and a child in a town only 90 minutes away. He had started this second life nearly 8 years ago. Sarah believed he was a traveling consultant whose job kept him on the road 4 days a week. He had used a different last name, Miller, and a completely different persona. To her, he was the hardworking, middle-class provider. To me, he was the high-powered executive. He had balanced the two of them with the precision of a clockmaker, never slipping up, never leaving a trail. Until today. I realized then that the letter hadn't been a surprise from Ethan. It had been a gift from someone else, someone who knew the truth and wanted to see the world burn. I didn't stay to hear his excuses. I didn't stay to watch him try to comfort Sarah or explain to his daughter why Daddy was a monster. I turned around and walked back to my car, my movements mechanical and numb. I could hear him calling my name, the sound of his footsteps running after me, but I didn't stop. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't drive home. I drove until I reached a deserted overlook above the river. I sat there in the silence, the engine ticking as it cooled, and I stared at the wedding ring on my finger. It felt like a shackle. I thought about all the people who had warned me. My friends, my father. They had seen the hunger in him, the calculation. I had called them cynical. I had called them blind. But the only one who was blind was me. The pain was so intense it felt physical, like a heavy weight crushing my lungs. But as the sun began to set, a different feeling began to stir beneath the agony. It was a cold, flickering flame of rage. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had stolen my life. He had used my father's sweat and blood to fund a secret family. He had played me for a fool for 15 years. I picked up my phone. I had dozens of missed calls and texts from Ethan. "Lara, please, I can explain. Don't do anything rash. I love you." I deleted them all without reading. Then I dialed a different number. It was my father's private line. "Dad?" I said, my voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "You were right. You were right about everything. And now I need your help. I don't just want a divorce. I want to take back every single thing he ever stole from us. I want him to remember this anniversary for the rest of his miserable life." As I spoke, I realized I had two choices. I could let this betrayal destroy me, or I could become the architect of his downfall. He thought he was a master of strategy. He thought he was the only one who knew how to play a long game. He was about to find out that he had learned everything he knew from my father, and that I was my father's daughter. The plan began to form in my mind, cold and precise. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to make a scene in public. I was going to go home. I was going to wait for him, and I was going to begin the most meticulous, soul-crushing revenge Ethan Miller Sterling could ever imagine. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, but the tears had stopped. The Lara who believed in fairy tales was dead. The woman who replaced her was someone Ethan wouldn't recognize. "Happy anniversary, Ethan," I whispered to the empty car. "Let the games begin." Part 3. When I returned to our large, expansive home, a house that now felt utterly hollow, cold, and alien, the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 4:30 in the afternoon. I had exactly 1 hour and a half before Ethan would arrive to pick me up for our special anniversary dinner. My hands were still trembling from the profound shock of what I had witnessed, but my mind was operating with a terrifying, almost clinical precision. I walked up the grand staircase to our master bedroom, approached the floor-length vanity mirror, and looked at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot from the tears I had cried in the car, and my skin was as pale as chalk. I took a succession of deep, measured breaths, forcing the raw panic down into the darkest corners of my mind. I needed a mask. A flawless, impenetrable, invisible mask of a blissfully happy, completely unsuspecting wife. I washed my face with ice-cold water, carefully applied a thick layer of makeup to conceal the intense emotional exhaustion, and slipped into the elegant, sophisticated dress I had purchased specifically for this milestone anniversary. As I pulled up the zipper, I made a silent, sacred vow to myself. This would be the absolute last time I ever dressed up for him. From this moment forward, every single action I took would be for myself, for my father, and for absolute justice. Precisely at 6 o'clock, the heavy front door clicked open. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard Ethan's footsteps ascending the stairs, the confident, light, easy stride of a man who believed he was the absolute master of his universe. He walked into the bedroom holding a massive, breathtaking bouquet of fresh white lilies. On his face was that exact same handsome, charming, warm smile that I had completely fallen in love with so many years ago. "Happy anniversary, beautiful," he murmured softly, stepping toward me and presenting the flowers. "You look absolutely breathtaking. 15 years have flown by like a single day, and I love you more now than I ever have before." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of his words made me physically nauseous. It required a monumental Herculean effort not to recoil in absolute disgust as he leaned down to kiss my cheek. His lips, which just hours prior had been kissing another woman in that blue suburban house, were now pressing against my skin. I forced my lips to curve into a radiant, convincing smile, accepted the bouquet, and replied in a voice that sounded remarkably, perfectly natural. "Thank you, Ethan. I can't believe it's been 15 years either. Today is a day we will both remember forever." The entire evening at the exclusive downtown restaurant was a masterclass in psychological torture. Ethan played the role of the adoring husband to absolute perfection. He raised his crystal glass, toast after toast, celebrating our longevity, our unbreakable bond, and our bright future. He laughed warmly, recounting amusing stories from our early college days, and even suggested we start looking at travel brochures for a luxury second honeymoon in Europe next spring. I sat across from him, sipping my wine, nodding and smiling at all the perfect corporate cues. But inside, a freezing, unyielding fire was consuming my old self. I stared at his manicured hands and thought about how those same hands held a child in a secret suburban house. I listened to his elaborate lies about a grueling business trip to Chicago and pictured the photo of him in a flannel shirt, blowing out birthday candles. The next morning, the moment Ethan left the house for his actual office, the real work began. I didn't cry. My tears had completely dried up, replaced by a cold, calculated strategy. My first destination was my father's corporate headquarters. I bypassed the receptionist, walked straight into my father's private executive suite, and closed the heavy oak door behind me. My father looked up from his desk, surprised by my unannounced arrival, but his expression instantly changed when he saw the icy determination written all over my face. Without uttering a single word, I placed my phone on his mahogany desk and slid the digital photo gallery across to him. There were the pictures of the blue house, Ethan's car parked in the driveway, the mailbox bearing a different family name, and the secret family enjoying their afternoon in the living room. My father stared at the screen, his face hardening with every passing second. A deep, dark fury flashed in his eyes, but he remained quiet, waiting for me to speak first. "You were right, Dad," I said, my voice shockingly steady, devoid of any tears. "You were right about him from the very beginning. He used me. He used your company, and he has been living a double life for years, but I am not going to let him ruin us. I don't want a quick, messy divorce where he walks away with half of our family's wealth. I want to take away absolutely everything he thinks he owns." My father looked up at me, a slow, grim nod of immense pride replacing his initial anger. He reached across the desk and gripped my hand tightly. "He messed with the wrong family, Lara. What is your plan?" Over the next 3 hours, my father and I, along with our most trusted, fiercely loyal corporate attorney and a high-end private investigator, mapped out a meticulous strategy of absolute devastation. We discovered that because Ethan had risen to the position of Senior Vice President of Operations, he had signing authority over several major commercial accounts. However, because my father had structured the company with brilliant foresight, Ethan's actual equity in the firm was entirely contingent upon his continued marriage to me, and a strict morality clause hidden deep within his executive partnership agreement. Our private investigator went to work immediately, uncovering the full, sordid truth within 48 hours. The woman in the blue house was named Sarah. She was a sweet, quiet school teacher who genuinely believed that Ethan was a high-flying regional consultant whose demanding job required him to travel and live in our city for 5 days a week. He had married her under a completely fabricated legal alias, utilizing falsified documents and a separate bank account funded entirely by embezzled bonuses from my father's company. Sarah had absolutely no idea that he was already married to a wealthy heiress, nor did she know that her entire comfortable life was built on a foundation of stolen money and profound identity fraud. She was just as much of a victim as I was. When the investigator handed me the file, a sinister, brilliant idea began to take root in my mind. Ethan thought he was a master chess player, keeping his two distinct worlds perfectly separated, balancing his corporate wealth with his suburban domestic bliss. He thought I was too weak, too blinded by my high school infatuation to ever look beneath the surface. I decided that I wasn't just going to confront him in a standard lawyer's office. That would be too merciful, too private for a man who had publicly humiliated my devotion for 15 years. I wanted his downfall to be cinematic, total, and completely irreversible. I was going to let him continue his elaborate charade for just a few more weeks, letting him believe he was completely safe, while my father and I quietly reallocated his corporate responsibilities, drained his access to the company accounts, and legally transferred every single one of our marital assets, our house, our investments, our savings, solely into my name based on the ironclad clauses he had signed. I was going to strip him of his armor, piece by piece, in absolute silence, until he was standing on the edge of a cliff, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already turned to dust. Part 4. The next 3 weeks required a level of emotional discipline I never knew I possessed. Every single day was a calculated performance. I had to look into the eyes of the man who had stolen 15 years of my life, smile at his jokes, kiss his cheek when he left for work, and listen to him talk about his upcoming regional corporate conference in the neighboring state. I knew exactly where he was going. He wasn't going to a conference. He was heading back to the blue house with the neat white fence to play the role of the loving suburban family man. Every time he stepped out of our front door, my private investigator tracked his every move, compiling an unassailable mountain of legal evidence, bank statements, and photographic proof of his systemic identity fraud and embezzlement. Meanwhile, behind the heavy, secure doors of my father's corporate headquarters, the trap was being quietly and ruthlessly constructed. Our legal team worked around the clock. Because Ethan had used company funds under a falsified identity to purchase the suburban house and fund his parallel life. He had violated federal financial laws, corporate statutes, and the strict morality clause embedded deep within his executive contract. Slowly, methodically, my father and I began to strip away his operational power. We quietly redirected his major corporate accounts to other senior executives, revoked his secondary signing authorities, and legally transferred our multi-million-dollar marital home, our joint investment portfolios, and our shared savings accounts entirely into my name, utilizing the ironclad power of attorney documents I possessed. Ethan was so blinded by his own perceived brilliance, so confident that I was still the naive, infatuated girl from high school, that he never bothered to check the corporate ledgers or our personal banking portals. He truly believed he was invincible. But my plan for vengeance wasn't just corporate. It was intensely personal. I refused to let him slip away into his secret life when his corporate career collapsed. I wanted him to lose absolutely everything at the exact same moment. On a rainy Tuesday morning, while Ethan was away on one of his fabricated business trips, I drove back to the quiet, Blackitney suburban neighborhood. My heart raced, but not from fear. From an icy, focused purpose. I walked up the concrete path to the front door and rang the doorbell. When the door opened, Sarah stood before me wearing an apron, a gentle, welcoming smile on her face. Up close, I could see the genuine kindness in her eyes, and a sharp pang of sympathy hit my chest. She wasn't my enemy. She was another casualty of Ethan's calculated malice. "Hello," she said politely. "Can I help you?" "Hello, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, steady, and filled with a strange, solemn empathy. "My name is Laura. I am not here to cause a scene, and I am not here to hurt you. But we need to talk about the man you think is your husband. We need to talk about Ethan." Over the next 2 hours, sitting at her kitchen table while her daughter was at preschool, I laid out the absolute devastating truth. I showed her our marriage certificate from 15 years ago, our corporate tax returns, and photographs of Ethan standing at high society galas by my side. Sarah's face drained of all color. She sat in stunned, breathless silence as her entire reality crumbled around her, just as mine had 3 weeks prior. She wept openly, realizing that the man she loved, the father of her child, was a phantom constructed entirely out of lies, forgery, and stolen wealth. But as I comforted her, I saw a familiar spark of maternal protection and righteous fury ignite in her eyes. She looked at me, wiping her tears, and asked, "What are we going to do?" I leaned in closer, a cold smile touching my lips. "We are going to give him the grand finale he deserves, and we are going to do it together." The day of the final reckoning arrived on a Friday, timed perfectly with the company's annual high-profile charity gala, an event where the entire city's elite, our biggest corporate clients, and local journalists would be in attendance. Ethan was in his element that evening. He wore a tailored tuxedo, a diamond-encrusted watch that my father had gifted him for his promotion, and that signature, effortless charm that had captivated me for half my life. He walked through the grand ballroom, shaking hands with billionaires, laughing with board members, acting like the undisputed heir to my father's commercial empire. He had no idea that the security guards at the entrance had already been instructed to lock the doors behind him, or that a pair of federal financial investigators were waiting quietly in the wings. As the evening reached its peak, my father took the stage to give his annual address. The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing across the opulent ballroom. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating our corporate success. We are celebrating the absolute triumph of truth, accountability, and the strength of family. And to demonstrate what happens to those who try to dismantle a family legacy, I want to invite my daughter, Lara, and our senior vice president, Ethan, to join me on stage." Ethan smiled broadly, adjusting his cuffs, and confidently walked up the steps, basking in the applause of the crowd. I walked up from the opposite side, my long black gown trailing behind me like a shadow. When we reached the center of the stage, Ethan reached out to take my hand, expecting a picture-perfect moment for the press. But instead of taking his hand, I stepped back, picked up the secondary microphone, and looked directly into his eyes. Eyes that suddenly flashed with a sudden, panicked realization that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Part 5. The silence that blanketed the opulent ballroom was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Hundreds of wealthy investors, prominent city officials, and local journalists stared up at the stage, their breath caught in their throats. Ethan's extended hand hovered in the empty air between us, trembling slightly as the confident, charming smile on his handsome face began to fracture, revealing a sudden, raw panic underneath. He looked at me, then at my father, his dark eyes darting around the stage like a cornered animal realizing it had stepped straight into a lethal trap. "Ethan," my voice resonated through the high-end audio system, completely steady, cold, and echoing with an undeniable authority that filled every corner of the grand room. "For 15 years, you stood by my side and pretended to be a devoted husband. For 15 years, you looked into my eyes, swore your eternal loyalty, and accepted the generosity, wealth, and profound trust of my father's family. You believed I was a naive, blinded fool. You truly believed that your elaborate, calculated web of deception was completely flawless." A murmur of shock rippled through the elite crowd. Ethan took a sharp step toward me, his face draining of all color, his corporate instincts kicking in as he tried to lower his voice and diffuse the situation before the cameras. "Lara, what on earth are you doing?" he hissed under his breath, trying to force a tense laugh for the audience. "You're making a scene. Let's step off the stage and talk about this privately." "No, Ethan, we are completely done talking in private," I replied, my voice cutting through his protest like a blade of ice. "Because while you were pretending to manage our regional corporate expansion, you were actually managing a masterclass in systematic identity fraud, embezzlement, and profound human betrayal. You didn't just cheat on your marriage, Ethan. You used my family's hard-earned money to illegally fund an entirely separate, parallel life under a forged name." With a dramatic, deliberate gesture, I gestured toward the massive, high-definition digital projector screens that hung directly above the stage, screens that were normally used to display corporate growth charts and promotional videos. The main technician, who had been thoroughly briefed by my father, clicked a single button. Instantly, the screens flashed to life, displaying a devastating, unassailable sequence of evidence. Huge, crystalline photos of the blue suburban house filled the room. Next to them were high-resolution copies of Ethan's falsified legal documents, bank statements showing the exact flow of stolen corporate funds into his secret personal account, and damning photographs of him living his double life. The ballroom erupted into an absolute frenzy of gasps, whispers, and the rapid, blinding flashes of camera shutters from the stunned journalists in the front row. "As of 5 o'clock this evening," I continued, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unbothered detachment, "you have been officially terminated from your position at this firm. Every single corporate account you managed has been audited, froze, and legally transferred. Furthermore, utilizing the ironclad morality and fraud clauses within our legal agreements, every single asset you thought you owned, our marital estate, your investment portfolios, your luxury vehicles, and every dollar in your bank accounts has been legally transferred solely into my name. You came into my life with absolutely nothing, Ethan. And tonight, you are leaving with exactly the same." Ethan's aristocratic composure completely shattered. He looked up at the massive screens and then down at the sea of powerful people who were now staring at him with expressions of utter disgust and mockery. Realizing his entire life, status, and freedom were disintegrating in a matter of seconds, he turned frantically toward the stage exit, intending to flee the building. But the moment his polished shoes hit the top of the stairs, two stern, heavy-set federal financial investigators stepped out from the shadows, blocking his path. They produced a pair of gleaming silver handcuffs, informed him of his rights regarding corporate embezzlement and identity fraud, and led him out of the grand ballroom in front of the flashing cameras of the press. He was entirely ruined, stripped of his dignity, his money, and his freedom, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic wreckage of his own ambition. The months that followed the public downfall of Ethan were a period of intense healing, quiet reflection, and profound personal reinvention for me. I worked closely with Sarah, ensuring that she and her beautiful little daughter were fully supported financially through a private trust fund that I established using a portion of the assets stripped from Ethan. We were no longer victims bound by the malice of the same deceitful man. We were two strong, independent women who had reclaimed our lives, our dignity, and our futures. I threw myself back into my father's business, not as a background supportive figure, but as an active, brilliant, and highly respected executive director, guiding the firm into a new era of unprecedented success. And it was during this journey of self-discovery and corporate leadership that the universe finally brought me what I had truly deserved all along: My father's firm partnered with a prominent, highly successful architectural design company on a massive city revitalization project. The head architect of the project was a man named David. David was 40 years old, possessing a quiet, rugged handsomeness, deep, intelligent hazel eyes, and a calm, grounded demeanor that immediately made me feel completely safe. Unlike Ethan, who always used his charm like a calculated weapon to manipulate and achieve status, David was entirely transparent, humble, and profoundly honest. He didn't care about my family's immense wealth or my prominent societal standing. He saw the sharp brilliance of my mind, the resilience of my spirit, and the deep capacity for loyalty that defined my heart. We spent long, beautiful evenings sitting in quiet coffee shops, discussing blueprints, sharing our life philosophies, and laughing effortlessly until the early hours of the morning. For the very first time in my entire life, I didn't have to chase a man. I didn't have to prove my worth or fight desperately for attention. David loved me simply for exactly who I was. He was my equal, my partner, and my absolute safe harbor. Today, I stand on the expansive deck of my beautiful new home, looking out at a breathtaking sunset that paints the evening sky in brilliant shades of gold, deep violet, and warm amber. I feel a profound, unshakable sense of peace settling deep within my soul. My hands no longer tremble, and my heart no longer aches with the ghosts of the past. The illusion of my high school fairy tale had to be violently destroyed so that I could build a real, authentic, and magnificent life on a foundation of true love, mutual respect, and absolute honesty. I am Laura. I am 36 years old, and I am finally, truly happy.